It is Friday, July 26th at 8:07 a.m. here in Phoenix, Arizona. This is episode 6 of the Three Body Problem podcast. Welcome to my co-host Costin Raiu in Bucharest. How are you, Costin?
Hey, Ryan. Doing quite well. It's a bit hot in Bucharest today, but it's been raining a bit as well. But hopefully, summer is soon will be soon over.
And you're back from vacation, back in your home office. Hello to the other member of the Three Buddies, Juan Andres. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Having some mic problems this morning, but trying to do my best here.
Well, I'm glad you apologized at the top of the show for the mic problem. Juan is on the road today, struggling with some microphone problems.
As
It has
usual.
been exactly 1 week since Crowd2K, the CrowdStrike incident last week. I don't think we need to rehash what happened. What we can do, though, is say that this is still the top story in cybersecurity this week. And I think advancing the story here, I want to kick right off with CrowdStrike's, what do they call it? Preliminary CrowdStrike's preliminary post-incident review (PIR) that explained what happened. Costin, you want to start right there? What happened as according to CrowdStrike?
Yeah, well, I still think it's good to just to maybe in 10 or 15 years from now on, people will not remember what that was, and they listening to the Three Body podcast and wondering what it was. But basically, it was a terrible blue screen of death incident on 8.5 million Windows computers from around the world, paralyzing airlines, critical infrastructure, and big companies. And according to the incident analysis from CrowdStrike, which by the way is written in a very careful language, I might say, um, it was one of the so-called detection, if you want, detection updates. Some people call them signature updates. They are way more complex than just simple signatures, to be honest, nowadays. It's more in the, let's say, kind of the class of P code or bytecode, which are instructions that the EDR driver is simply following in order to detect malware. And it turns out that one of these updates broke everything. It passed validation. They did have internal processes to catch this kind of incidents, but for some reason they didn't catch it, and it was deployed, and hence the crash everywhere. And essentially, this content in one of these channel files, as CrowdStrike calls them, in particular channel files with the number 291, this resulted in a memory read out of bounds, which means it was trying to read memory in an area which shouldn't be normally read, and this caused the exception. I think that what is missing is perhaps to explain like a bit more carefully how these channel files actually work. Are they maybe interpreted, or are they turned into code which is executed directly in kernel mode, which are two quite different things. So maybe there should be a bit more transparency in there. But nevertheless,
I've been thinking about that a lot. Like, are you just flinging like some equivalent of shellcode into the kernel, right? Like, it's
and
so,
compiling it on the fly, right?
yeah, yeah.
You
There's
know, like,
something really kind of shaky about it.
I think a lot of people were thinking that because it's hard to believe that this wouldn't be caught in an early testing stage. But yeah, I think the other important point here is that this didn't last for very long. It was only like a window of less than 2 hours. But nevertheless, during those 2 hours, we are talking like close to 10 million computers from around the world managed to get that update. And this is also like, I would say it's pretty scary, like pretty unfortunate, but also at the same time pretty impressive that you have an update infrastructure that is so reliable to deliver in less than a couple of hours to deliver this update to 10 million customers.
Hey, and the limitation on that seems to have been what time of day that happened, right?
Exactly.
Like, I'm hearing that folks in Australia were kind of more greatly affected. I know I've actually heard from some people that were doing sort of incident response for their own companies in the middle of the night, and became aware before CrowdStrike was actually acknowledging or was aware of what was going on. But I think we're largely saved by the particular timeline, right? When you push this out, 4 a.m. UTC, and it still affected a great deal of people. But to you giving props to the update infrastructure, I suspect that this could have been a lot worse if more machines had just been on, right? If it just been the middle of the day, East Coast or something like that.
One of the things we speculated last week was that this could have been CrowdStrike pushing while Microsoft Windows was going through one of these changes things, and it could have been that hiccup there. We're ruling that out now, right? Are we ruling that out based on CrowdStrike's explanation?
Well, they are calling it like two separate incidents. I don't think this is ruling out that the other incident was big. I think that the other incident was also
No,
significant.
that's
What they are saying is that they are not connected, like one to each other. They are not connected.
No. We were discussing whether CrowdStrike pushed an update. We were talking about whether CrowdStrike had tested and gone through all their processes. And the speculation was, well, they could have done everything right and pushed. And by the time they got to Windows would have gone through one of these rolling changes things Juan had mentioned last week. That's what I mean. We're ruling that out as a cause here, right?
That doesn't seem to have been the case, right? Like this, I don't know, right? Like Costin, I personally, I don't think that's the case. But you mentioned sort of the careful language of the way that this content update write up is put forth. I think it's so careful that I have a hard time parsing it, right? Like I'm very carefully reading each sentence, being like, you're telling me about an update from March, but then it gets pushed in this way, and then it gets past all the validation, but it I'm sorry, when we talk about there's this kind of vagueness around this validation pipeline where you go, okay, are you just saying that like you've got some linters and some things that are checking the syntax or checking the code statically? Because how did this run? If you were actually putting this in a test environment where you run the thing and it didn't BSOD, right? Like if it wouldn't blue screen of death when it was developed and tested, why? Right? Like, is there some different version of Windows that you're working with? Is it different settings? Is it a different environment? Or is this just static checks? And you're saying we have a nice, we had a nice little linter here that would make sure that things looked right. We didn't actually run it. And then I'm trying to bite my tongue here for a variety of reasons, but the rollout, the discussion of how these channel updates are rolled out to customers is where I'm just like bury my face in the sand, right? Like this is just terrible.
Perhaps maybe it helps to say how things were done maybe around 30 years ago. That maybe it can provide a window into what happened here. But I can tell you that a very, very long time ago, in a galaxy far away, people were essentially testing the updates in a Linux farm. So you would maybe create all these signature updates, and you want to test for detection and false positives, essentially. And the test for false positives and detection actually happens in a huge farm that runs on top of Linux. And these being signatures, you don't expect them to actually affect the stability of the whole ecosystem. So essentially, they just, you can push them, publish them to everyone, as long as they don't cause false positives and they don't miss malware. And they are being tested on something like Linux, like automatically through a Linux farm. So I remember this did happen. I'm not saying that this is how things are getting tested nowadays, but it's also a possibility.
Well, the emphasis on what you're describing is testing that the signature works
Mm-hmm.
for detection,
Exactly.
right? That it's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not a false positive, it's not going to create false positives, it's not creating false negatives, but it isn't about the stability, reliability, etc.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, and Kosin, I'm genuinely asking, right? Like when you describe this sort of like old school paradigm, were those signatures? I mean, are they being flung into the kernel, right? Like that's the part where there's a distinction here that I think a lot of folks kind of learned to be extremely wary and careful with, of not having content that just kind of fiddles with the kernel on the fly. And I'm surprised to see it sort of blatantly put forth as like a feature in this sense.
Well, a very, very long time ago again, when I was doing Windows driver coding. So the first solution we tried was to have a tiny driver running in the kernel, and then to have the engine in user mode and essentially communication between these two, which was a very slow solution. So then we tried to move everything into kernel mode, including the engine, the emulator, which was way much faster, but a lot more unstable. So this was crashing a lot because you don't have any kind of room for error. Like the tiniest error in kernel mode, it will crash everything. So I think that we ended up with some kind of a hybrid where some functionality was in kernel mode, some of it, like for instance some anti-rootkit detection, but a large part of the engine was running in user mode, and there was inter-process communication in order to uh, uh, pass like objects to be scanned to the engine running in user mode. And yeah, this is like the never-ending paradigm. Like, where do you try to stop the malware? Do you want to stop it in kernel mode, like as low as possible? Do you want to stop it like as early as possible? It's kind of a never-ending, like a chicken and egg issue.
Well, the obvious question now is CrowdStrike says, listen, we're going to fix our processes. We're probably going to fix whatever we do, and this probably will not happen again. As we discussed last week, this happens. It'll happen again. It happens to all vendors. It'll happen again. That was kind of a resignation thought from us. Microsoft has come out, obviously. The 8.5 million machines affected are there. It's on their platform. David Weston had a blog post kind of positioning Microsoft, and went to great lengths to dunk on CrowdStrike a little bit. But there's a big missing piece there that in my mind has not been answered while we're all dunking on CrowdStrike is, how does Microsoft allow a BSOD loop to infinity? Is there something in their technology that should be blocking that? And do they have any responsibility for 6,000 Delta flights being...
So I think we were a little bit flippant about saying, well, you probably shouldn't, like last episode we said, you shouldn't let the system BSOD on the same kernel driver, 1,000 times, right? Like after 10 times, why don't you stop it and like just load without it? My friend Kyle Kritz, who's much smarter than I am, made the point the other day of, well, yeah, but that's a fantastic way to disable any like security driver on the part of attackers, right? If you just kind of corrupt it, fiddle with it, get the machine to restart 10 times, and then you boot up without a security product, essentially. There's complications to it, right?
I think there's a point there, and I was thinking as well if there's some attack mechanisms, but if you can blue screen the system with the cause, like as a security solution driver is the cause for that blue screen, and the bad guys do that, then I would say, they are there in the machine. Like it's pretty difficult to imagine a scenario where a bad guy can do this and they can't do actually much worse already. So I was thinking about that as well. Like, yeah, what if it's abused in order to disable? But like, if you do this in a loop, like 10 times, and you cause blue screen over and over, and it's not just, let's say, random blue screens, but blue screens where this specific driver is the reason, then I would say it's probably safe to give the option to start without it. But again, somebody like the user or the admin would have to make the choice, like consciously press, yes, I want to start without that driver. So not to do it automatically, but someone at least to hit yes. Because in this case, most of the computers affected required deep human intervention, where you type the BitLocker key. And I think that was the biggest nuisance here, that you need to type the BitLocker key, like just type it, physically type it. Some people invented all sorts of very smart mechanisms to avoid typing that with barcodes and virtual keyboards. That's pretty cool.
Pretty
Yeah,
cool,
absolutely. Yeah. But they're like solutions to a problem that, maybe it should have like easier ways to solve in the first place.
Well, let me go back to the top and ask the question: why by design this is how it works, and is there a technical solution that stops this from never happening again?
Well, let's divide that up, right? Because your question was about Microsoft's role and
Correct.
part of it.
My point was David Weston's blog went to great lengths to say, hey, this is just 1% of Windows machines, which I didn't like that piece there
So
because it
fuck.
was 1% of Windows machine
What
that
difference
caused,
does it
yeah,
fucking make?
that
Like
caused.
that's it's only 1%. Oh, it's not 1% because of some kind of defensive mechanism in the 99%. They're not CrowdStrike customers, or they weren't online when the update was online. So it could have been however much of customers, CrowdStrike's customer base, right? Like there was nothing stopping that
And who
inherently.
cares? Who cares? Even if
Yeah.
it's one machine, if it's one machine that's causing Blinky Blinky to stop Blinky Blinky in
No,
a
no.
hospital, it's like, who
One
cares if
machine is
it's
accepted every day. We are talking about 8.5 million machines, which is
correct?
and it could have been, I don't know, 30 million machines for all we know. Look, I do want to make that separation there. And once again, for anybody who wasn't around for the last episode, I do want to caveat heavily that, like, I personally do not want to dunk on CrowdStrike. I may have my thoughts about the company, and I'm obviously in a competitive position with them, but this is a pretty shitty situation for everybody involved, and I'm not gloating. I was happy that we were able to kind of tread that line really carefully for the last episode and not turn it into just like, making fun of them for this, awful incident that a lot of people have to deal with. Now that we're looking at the breakdown of it, I have to say that while I am fascinated by the technicality and the sort of edge cases and how did they decide, why would they decide to put this in the kernel or not, and all the possibilities, the true problem here is the update rollout mechanism. And that part I don't know how to excuse for a mature company that has been around for God knows how long, has a massive customer base, has like critical infrastructure customers and so on. That part is genuinely terrifying to me. That part is genuinely difficult to excuse. And I'm looking forward to seeing George Kurtz's testimony in front of Congress, because I would be very surprised if you have a group of conscientious endpoint developers working there who have not been raising this as a problem for 2 years or 6 months, or how, because there is no way the kind of people who develop this shit and are responsible for it were not spending many nights going, guys, this is a bad idea. This is not how we should be rolling this out. Like, you're telling me that the customers have granular control over all of these other updates, right? Like, they can, as a CrowdStrike customer, apparently, you can choose what stage of updates you're at, how far you roll them out. You can have canaries, which I think is a brilliant design, but apparently it doesn't apply to these channel files that are having kernel interactions. In the description of in the really carefully worded description they put out, they also point that like the hunters, like the people who are doing sort of like threat hunting and analysis, can push these channel update signatures, which to me immediately I'm like, I'm sorry, slow down there, right? Like, who's writing these? Like, who's validating and sending these forward? Because having worked in this space, look, I will say this. I will come out and put this forth from a personal capacity. In any AV or EDR or whatever I've worked at in the past, I have never personally pushed a signature in my entire life. I have written stuff, I have suggested stuff, and then I've sent it to people who know what they're doing and asked them to please validate what I'm working on and push it. I have never personally pushed a signature. And, there's good reason for it, right? The old employer, as Ryan calls them, would have fired any of us immediately had we done something even remotely close to this, right? If we DDoSed the entire customer base. So you learn to treat these things with respect. And it sounds like there's a lot of institutional mechanism around treating the majority of the signature stuff and updates with respect. And then there's this one side of the house where you're just kind of YOLOing things out with no granular controls, no testing, no phased rollout. And that's the part that I find very difficult to excuse. It is not, I don't think it's because of my bias. I think it's because of experience and just like feeling responsible for customers and kind of being terrified of what you can do when you are sort of the security regent for a lot of people. And I just don't know how you, in good faith, go out there and say, That was our update mechanism. We had no checks, no phases, no testing really in situ, and gave no granular controls. And we let a bunch of random people just like fling signatures into it. But trust us, and it'll never happen again, right? Like, what the fuck, man?
On the flip side, the exact same scenario and exact same question you just asked of Microsoft. Why does that happen on 8.5 million of my machines, and I am helpless? And that my customer, like there's an interconnectedness here that I'm trying to get to, which is we've all been through CrowdStrike's weaknesses and missing of code and policies. Where is the Microsoft responsibility here, Costin? Is there what else is missing from Weston's blog in your mind?
Well, I think it's a very good blog because first of all, it's written for everyone, so it's easy to understand for most of the people out there. Like you immediately understand what's going on and what is happening and what Microsoft is doing. Yeah, what is missing, and I think that was written a bit maybe later by John Cable, the vice president of Windows servicing and delivery. So he gave maybe a bit more details as well as helpful advice on how to deal with that. What I would have really loved to see was maybe a very deep technical blog from someone in the Windows kernel team, like talking a bit about their adoption of Rust. I'm not saying that the Rust would have solved anything, but still is like
What is Rust?
memory save language that is the new
Rust.
Yes.
Oh, Rust. I see. Rust. Yeah.
Sorry for the Romanian Romglish, right?
Rust with an O.
Roast, yes. So I would have loved to see a blog talking a bit about what the kernel team is doing, especially in the future, how they are working on some mitigations that prevent, let's say, a blue screen if a driver is trying to read some unallocated memory. Maybe that can be avoided. You don't have to crash the whole system. I think that the blue screen is like the worst possible outcome of any kind of operation in kernel mode. You don't have to blue screen. Like in many cases, the network stack is working, the file system is working, like they can even write the crash dump to the disk, right? So you don't have to take such a drastic measure, halt everything, and the only option is to reboot. I would like to see like more flexible options, such as terminate the driver and continue, something like that. Or before you reboot, give the user the chance to reboot without that driver. Again, I would like to have some kind of flexibility.
Let's kind of let's acknowledge that once you're talking about a blue screen, there are levels of instability in the system that
Not always.
I don't personally understand. Yeah, I mean,
Not always.
I understand and I agree with you. I just don't want to make it seem that simple where it's like, look, they have a myriad choices and they're choosing the worst one, or like they could just do better. I'm sure that this is a really complex case, right? Like kernel development and kernel stability and what you do in these situations is pretty hard. And frankly, I don't think Microsoft ever enjoys or wants to go the blue screen route, right? Like at that point, they're completely out of control. They cannot do anything themselves nor anybody else. Like you're talking about kind of just literally crashing the system, and you're going to have to come back, and that's what's made all this so hard. I am curious. I would love an honest retrospective about the choices that have been made around handling these things in the kernel, and I don't know that we can have one openly. Like that's the kind of thing that maybe can be discussed at a blue hat.
Why not?
Because the other side of this, that the reason that we want to, as security vendors, we want to stay in the kernel, and the reason that you have all of these like driver altitude concept in Windows and so on is we need to be as far down as possible without destabilizing the kernel or the system in order not to be unseated by a piece of malware or a different driver that's vulnerable or something like that. So there is this difficulty that comes with the fact that we as security vendors need to be as far down as possible to not be rooted out. And most of the time when you come up with sort of facile discussions about why the security vendor should not be in the kernel, right? The Apple approach. It just means like keep the security vendors from being effective. But the other version of it, the other side of it on the Windows side is, well, the any of these solutions, to Kyle's point earlier, right? If I can just force Windows to disable that security driver by abusing whatever protections are there, you're effectively unseating the security product. And this happens all the time. Like, we're dealing with, like, anti-tampering is what takes some of the most effort out of any modern EDR solution. How do I stop something else from disabling the driver, shutting the driver down, running us out of memory, finding some other little edge case that just makes it so that the security product, the operating system turns against the security product, or the security product becomes blind, disabled, in some way paralyzed, and then you can do whatever you want. And that's the real battle of it all that users don't see. So we're trying to maintain stability, but you do have another player in this, right? It's not just the security vendor and Microsoft and trying to make Windows play nice. You are doing this kind of defensive development to try to keep attackers from being able to just shove you out the window.
I think that it's a balance here, maybe between detection and stability. It depends what you want more. Let's say, are you okay with the idea of running and not crashing no matter what? So, like, you can miss malware, you can simply not detect things but never crash, or it's the other way around. It's impossible for you to not to detect something. Like, the worst case, you will blue screen the system. So depends which one of these two approaches you think is better.
To be honest, I don't think that's a real choice in this market. I think there is no version of acceptable for, yes, we detect everything, but you crash. Like, as far as I understand the market, and what people want and what CISOs want, the idea of crashing is just unacceptable. Hell, dude,
Absolutely.
we spend a lot of time just fighting the fact that, like, these people don't even want to restart their machines after installing the freaking product. Even that is a differentiator. They don't even want to stop production for 45 seconds to restart the machines after installing the product. There's a lot of
It's a
development that
false
goes into
offer.
that.
But Costin, your offer is a false offer
It
as well,
is. It
because there
is.
is no yeah, because you're not detecting everything anyway. Even if I give you this intrusive access to the kernel and everything, you're still missing a ton of shit. I still have a
Absolutely.
malware epidemic. I still have a ransomware epidemic. Like, the offer is not fair.
Yes.
That
Yes.
also doesn't necessarily mean you're not swamped with threat alerts, right? Like, not only are you not missing anything, we are detecting even things that are not malware at all, right? You coughed twice, and, like, there's a suspicious event, right?
I want to pivot to the real crux of this conversation, but I want to just like rule out one other thing that popped up in a previous episode from Conspiracy Ryan. We're completely ruling out foul play here, right? No, Conspiracy Ryan wants to rule out things. Are we ruling out foul play here? Is there any way at all that this could have been an advanced
We're
adversary doing some magic that
no,
does this? No.
yeah, no. I wouldn't say we're ruling out foul play. I just think we're ruling out foul play on the part of people who don't work at CrowdStrike.
Okay, so there is a
No, no, no.
challenge. So
I'm
you're saying,
being.
wait a second, wait a second, wait a second. No. I just want to rule it out because I brought it up on a previous episode. The previous episode was like, hey, could this have been? And I'm saying, based on the CrowdStrike explanation, the only way it could have been is if there was some sort of advanced adversary internally
Nah.
doing some real crazy shit, right?
No way. There is some fucking PM somewhere in the past few years who said that it was acceptable to not rewrite or re-implement this, that it wasn't a priority to put granular controls in how these signature files are distributed. And that person needs to get yeeted into the sun. The rest of it are people living with those circumstances.
Good, let's rule it out. Let's help the people to rule it out completely.
While on the topic of of conspiracy theories, I just wanted to say there were some ridiculous conspiracy theories on Twitter/X in the first hours, talking about CrowdStrike being involved in the DNC investigation. If you guys remember 2016, when the DSC was hit
No,
by the
QAnon
nukes.
never forgot that shit. Yeah.
The CrowdStrike server came up in a national presidential debate.
Absolutely. Where is the server exactly? So there's for sure there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I think it's all
That's not where I was
bullshit.
going. That was not where I was going. I was thinking of a nation state looking to cause chaos in another nation,
Nah.
like the kind of things we're seeing in Paris today. The kind, right? You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
right.
Like,
It seems not. It was not the case. It wasn't something because probably if they wanted to cause real chaos or to cause real destruction, I think that the possibility was there. So again, this was probably just some random accident, unfortunate accident, not uh, something
Look, man,
on purpose.
you saw Costin and I were talking about this in our little group chat for the podcast, right? Anytime conspiracy theories come along, um, on some level, I try to remind myself that people want comfort. And before people used to turn to religion for comfort. You used to say, well, God would never let this or that happen. And if it happened, it's because God intended it. And now we've outlawed God. So instead, we want to believe that someone must have done this intentionally because someone must be in control. And the reality that we are deeply uncomfortable with is that dumb shit happens all the time. It isn't intentional. No one is in control. And 8.5 million systems can just shut down overnight over something absolutely trifling and idiotic. And people are going to die, and flights are going to get canceled, and things are not going to work. And that's just reality.
conspiracy Ryan asks
And I
questions.
like I like what you were saying, Juan, that perhaps this was meant to happen. And I wanted to ask, and I was wondering myself, is it actually a good thing this happened this early? That now everyone's talking about it. There's discussions about improving Windows. Probably every other EDR vendor in the world is. Scrutinizing their source code and testing their procedures. So
Yeah.
perhaps it was actually good this happened.
Pain is good.
It's a silver lining type situation. Look, yeah, if we want to be optimistic, then the way to look at this is to say, we exist in a space with no legitimate regulation, no actual standards for software that is relatively critical, and a horrendous culture of misprioritization. There is this notion that we need to be serving what customers want and having these roadmaps that are revolve entirely around features and what did a customer ask for, and that's cute and everything, but there are serious tech debt problems and just general security architecture problems that are never a priority in anyone's roadmap and that are never going to be demanded by a customer who doesn't know what your internal systems architecture looks like. They don't, if somebody had come out with a document that said, oh, also, we have these kernel updates and we ship them whenever we want, they can be written by anyone here, and yeah, you have no choice about how it goes out, and if something goes wrong, the whole system will be unstable. I'm sure customers would have said, I'm sorry, we would like to feature request that you change that. That isn't happening. That doesn't happen. And you don't have a regulator and you don't have anybody actually inspecting these things. And FedRAMP is bullshit. And any of the, all these supposed certifications are bullshit. So it seems that this is the only kind of incident that drives actual change and scrutiny within not just those companies, but everyone in the space. We've all had to stop for a second and go, hey, check your backyard. Are we doing things right? Are we vulnerable to this thing? Genuinely, is this a priority? So yeah, this seems to be the only way we know how to drive change. I also wonder if this is the only way that we will get customers to have greater scrutiny about what they're being sold, what they're installing, and what they rely on.
On this point here, right here, because like this is the thought that popped into my mind. How much responsibility do customers have to not be deploying these kinds of flimsy things on critical systems that stops hospital lights from blinking? Like there's a level of responsibility there as well.
No,
Like
no,
why is Falcon
no,
sitting on that server? Like no.
Ryan, no, because that goes completely counter to everything we have been telling these people for the past 20 years.
And we might
Patch
have been
your
wrong.
No, 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 no. Think about the inverse corollary here. What are you telling them? Don't put security products on systems that are important and don't update them. right? Like that's what we've been complaining about
More
nonstop.
product security, less security products. More
Oh
product
God.
security, less security products.
So you're going to work at Microsoft now, is what we're hearing here. You finally turned the Dave Weston got to you.
You have these agents stopping lights from blinking. It's like at some point, and that's the elephant in the room, because let's pivot to it now. Microsoft has made it clear, listen, hey, you want somebody to blame the European Union. This is we were gonna kick these bastards out of the kernel a long time ago,
Do
but because of
not,
this WMP
do
settlement,
not.
no, let's discuss it because Costin brought up Jordan Cable's blog, which by the way, people at Microsoft, PR people at Microsoft, when you're putting out these blogs in your VP's name, could you write it like have human beings write it and not have ChatGPT do all this nonsense language, blah blah blah.
VPs don't have
But
time
anyway,
to write this shit.
it was so ridiculous. But anyway, there's one line that I wanted to flag there, and I think this is how Microsoft kind of like, sends up those trial balloons and soft test things. Is this incident shows clearly that Windows must prioritize change and innovation in the area of end-to-end resilience. Now, this is Microsoft VP of Windows Servicing and Delivery, the organization responsible for keeping billion-plus Windows devices protected and productive. Microsoft would like nothing better. There's a bunch of VPs in there that are discussing right now, how the hell do we get this settlement revisited so we can kick these guys out? They also have a big Windows Defender monkey on their neck as well, which is causing the crux of the problem. How do you, Costin, you're a European. Why the hell did your governments put us here?
Why did you do this to us?
What can I say? I was thinking that there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of problems in the world, and there's a lot of problems in the European Union, of which I am a happy citizen. But I think that security solutions need to be in kernel mode. That's a reality. Like it will be this never-ending battle between malware and who is before whom and who gets to run first, and then vulnerable drivers. We've seen this happen for...
Works for Apple.
No, it fucking doesn't. It does not. That's the part that we need to be really clear about. I am happy to see a Dave Weston blog and have people come and tell us what they wish they could see and all that stuff, because at least there's still a cat and mouse game happening on Windows. And like, I don't want them to end that, because it's that you need tension. A company needs to have a product team that's fighting an engineering team. You need the natural tension between people, different stakeholders with different priorities, trying to battle it out to get to a place. What Apple did is unconscionable. It is absolutely unforgivable. They found a way to shut the door on anyone else being able to inspect systems in any meaningful way. And then they chose not to do it themselves either. And that is a complete abnegation. It's a systemic abnegation of responsibility.
That's what put Microsoft where they are. They decided to do it themselves with Defender, and now they have an antitrust issue and a competitive issue where the European Union has to step in and say, hey, you cannot have a competitive advantage. This is crazy.
There are multiple ways to go about this. What Apple could have done is to create safe endpoints that they manage they could have said, look, we're going to protect the kernel, and then we're going to let you hook into this, and this.
I don't see a malware epidemic and a ransomware epidemic on macOS. Like, come on, guys. Like,
stop. That there is,
yeah, but I don't see an epidemic.
Because there's no one to tell you about it.
I don't see massive APT reports on this big macOS. Like, come on, guys. It's not a fair comparison.
How are you going to know if there's no one watching? That's what Apple has done. All Apple has done is manage the perception issue around malware. When we find APTs on macOS, their malware was designed for 4 versions ago, and it still works, and no one notices and no one can tell, and it's been fucking rolling just fine.
So you're saying we have an equal epidemic on macOS like we have on Windows? Are you being serious?
It's not
that equal. We just don't know about.
It's not equal. I'm saying that the barrier for entry and the ability to function in macOS for APTs is much, much, much lower. They have far less concerns about remaining on those platforms, and they're getting to sail by just fine without anybody noticing that they're there. And we should be far more scared of that situation, and that's a situation that I do not want to see Windows become as well.
Costin, is there a way to bridge it? Half the Apple version, half the Microsoft kernel version. What is the answer cannot be status quo. That's my thing. It's like we cannot move forward with 10 million machines dropping because 1% of Windows goes down, and we are in this monoculture because we have to give you kernel access to.
I think there's probably some kind of compromise that is possible. I'm here the same as I'm saying exactly as Juan is that it not I disagree that macOS doesn't suffer from malware and doesn't have the same problems, and it may actually be even easier for the bad guys to target macOS at the moment. From the kernel mode point of view and crashing the system, I think there's probably a middle way here. There could be isolation and there could be enclaves in which the drivers can run. And again, for me, if you ask me, and indeed it was a poisoned question, like what do you prefer, detection or stability? I think in the pyramid of things, well, with Satya's secure computing and everything, putting it the security ahead of everything else, I think stability is probably above security. Without stability, that's a foundation. That's a foundation. So the stability is the most important thing, and isolating drivers and making it more difficult for the bad guys to inject into kernel mode or to do bad things. I think that's also just as important. But stability is way up to the top, in my opinion.
You said, if you ask me, so let me ask you, I make you czar of cybersecurity and I say, Costin, go fix this. Go fix this where the kernel blue screen of panic doesn't ever happen again, one, and we're not at risk of this happening again, right? You have to make compromises and trade-offs. Like what's a decent trade-off to answer everything that we've discussed?
I would go to the kernel team and say this: I'm okay for you guys to re-implement things and make them 15% slower, but to avoid the possibility that drivers blue screen and halt the system like entirely when there's like something minor happening, such as an out of bounds memory read. But I would say it's fine if you slow down the system 15%. That's fine, because I think in most of the cases, this is the issue is that any mitigation that you implement at that level, it will slow down the system. Like, just think about all these memory data leaks, exploits, vulnerabilities that have been reported over the last years with Intel CPUs, AMD CPUs. In general, the mitigations, they slow down the system. In some cases, you are given the option like, are you sure that you really need this mitigation? Because it will slow down your system like 5% or 10% or 15%. I would say it's fine for you guys to slow down the system 15% if what I get in exchange is a more stable operating system. So I would trade a bit of speed for stability.
Does that work for you, Juan?
I look at it a little differently.
You're in charge. Fix it.
Yeah. So I look at this differently, and my advice, I'm almost scared to put this forth because I don't trust these companies at all. But like my advice is different. You want to manage the kernel. You know, as Apple or Microsoft, that you know the kernel better than anybody else who wants to fiddle with the kernel. Why does every security vendor need to develop their own hooks into the kernel instead of having a standard set of hooks and sort of a priority of inspectability in the system that you as the kernel czar manage, protect, and make sure is compliant, and that you essentially allow these drivers with a certain level of altitude to hook into and play with these special pre-managed hooks and ways of sort of like connecting to the kernel. And I say that with something a slightly different but adjacent problem in mind. There doesn't seem to be a standard way to collect memory, neither on macOS nor on Windows. And what we see is, because this is an essential thing that incident responders need, you see these really expensive tools come up, and need a ton of maintenance, especially with the Windows rolling systems, just to be able to inspect memory. And on Mac, I don't even know how you collect memory these days. But it is an essential thing that we need. It is where you catch malware. The most, in my book, the most like reliably, right, is you're able to come and collect a memory sample and move on. My point here, not to deviate, but rather to say, why isn't it a priority for Microsoft or Apple to maintain an endpoint, an API, anything that allows you to do this safely and reliably in a protected way? And that's where I would, like, if we are going to make changes here and we are acting in good faith, Microsoft, Apple are acting in good faith. They want a healthy security ecosystem with third parties in it. Then say, look, we're not kicking you out of the kernel. What we're going to do is we're going to maintain all of the avenues into it. And we only have to protect this part of it. We don't have to worry about interoperability. We don't have to worry about you fiddling with something you weren't supposed to and breaking it, but we're going to give you all of the powers that you're used to in order to see what happens when the system is running and to be able to double and triple check it. And then all of us can spend all of our time is making sure that Microsoft is keeping these things healthy and realizing when they're being tampered with, etc. That is a future where you enable a security community to be built on top of your ecosystem, and rather than having it be sort of parasitic and fighting it back and forth, constantly hoping they'll go away. That's what I'd like to see.
All right, I got a prediction. I got a quick conspiracy Ryan prediction. If the CSRB exists long enough, I believe there'll be a CSRB report on this. And I believe and I'm predicting that the main recommendation will be to kick these guys out of the kernel. Figure out a way to kick them out of the kernel. Figure out the trade-offs around detections. I think you guys are saying it's impossible to write an EDR that doesn't have sufficient privileges to host 8.5 million machines. So I believe that that's coming down the pike.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's impossible to write an EDR that does anything. You do have some garbage EDRs out there that all they were doing was reporting your like Windows ETW logs and just pushing them to a log stash somewhere, and they were charging you for that as if that was like a grand thing they were doing for you. But that's because there's no quality controls. There's just marketing. I don't think you're wrong, Ryan, about the CSRB coming out with a recommendation like that, but I think that it would be cutting off our noses to spite our faces.
I think Microsoft would be happy with that recommendation.
Oh, they'd be fucking thrilled.
To go back to the EU lawyers and say, hey, we need to revisit this settlement. This settlement needs to be revised. I think that's coming down the pike as well. I think when hospital lights stop blinking, all these things become in play.
Yep, I think that's the kind of nefarious regulatory capture we've been discussing with Microsoft for 6 episodes now.
I just wanted to say, like, as a sanity check, again, let's not forget that it's not Microsoft. This is not Microsoft's fault. Like a sanity check. Yes, they were obviously crashing like 8.5, but again, it was not Microsoft's fault.
I think the reboot loop, the infinite reboot loop, is some sort of
That's the only issue.
Costin is right. This is highlighting a failure state that is hard to recover from, but it is doing so on the back of a failure state that we shouldn't have gotten to. And a lot of this industry has, over the past 30 years, as Costin reminds us, has learned not to do these things. And we do need to look harshly upon a situation where somebody just ignores what are considered best practices and then goes, oh, sorry that happened to you. Here's a $10 Uber Eats card.
Hey, but Juan, you're forgetting the one thing. You're telling me sorry it will happen again. That's the thing I can't comfortably live
Ryan,
with. That this is the status quo.
The whole point is you need to accept that it will happen again and therefore design this thing in a way that minimizes that impact. It shouldn't have been 8.5 million machines before you realize you have a problem. It should have been 8. You should have.
Correct, and you just said that none of this is Microsoft's problem. Like
I'm not saying it's not Microsoft's problem. I'm saying that the problem we're trying to address is like 4 steps below where this actually happened. And like, yeah, we'd love to see a more resilient kernel that, doesn't lock you into a BSOD loop and then you have to go manually find where all of your computers are. But that is a problem that is 4 layers deeper than what we're experiencing right now, which is somebody was thoughtless about their update mechanism and not having phases. And you have to not, dude, there's a lot of hubris in that. You have to. I fight people within S1 all the time because I'd rather be aggressive and go, hey, let's find this thing. There's an APT out there. Let's push these signatures. Let's do this thing in memory, whatever. And there's always somebody that comes back and says, no, we are going to test it here. Then we may deploy it in this small set. Then within 2 months, you'll see that. And I get mad because I just want to find, whatever threat actors out there. But they're doing it because you're responsible for X amount millions of machines and you're not allowed to go with some harebrained scheme and then take them all down. So, like I said, there needs to be a healthy tension, and it's missing in some situations in a way that scares me.
I had one last question, open question. Open question. Like, I thought reading the CrowdStrike blog, there was like one thing missing. Maybe I missed it. Maybe you guys know. But I wanted to know, okay, 8.5 million Windows machines were affected, but like, were all of them, like every single machine that got the update blue screen, or was it like 50%? Was it probabilistic, or it was like 100%? 100% of the machines that got this 291 update crashed. Like, this is still one of the open question, in my opinion.
That's a really good
I think the
question.
description that it's the out-of-bounds read vulnerability description suggests that all
Yeah, but then
crashed. I mean,
then we're
it's.
right back to this testing problem. You're telling me that this happened in every
I'm not gonna do 20 more minutes of this.
every machine that
Go
got
ahead, go
it
ahead, finish it
blue
up.
screen. What the fuck is your testing pipeline? What is your testing pipeline? What did you do? You just kind of like sniff it and you go, oh yeah, it
Yeah,
seems
I
fine. And you're
tell
like,
you, Juan, it was tested on the Linux farm.
okay, please
Let's move
move
on.
us on from this, please.
Quickly, we're going to touch on these last topics quickly because we're running out of time. Mandiant report on APT45, kind of graduating on Dariel, Silent, Chalima, Onyx, whatever
Sweet.
Microsoft calls it. Is that what's the significance of this? And let me start the question this way: the report goes all the way out on attribution, down to which unit within which part of the North Korean government. How good is Mandiant at attribution? Are they considered like are we to trust everything they say? You guys know better than I
I,
do.
I think in this particular case, when we're talking about the attribution, that seems to be. I'm not saying Mandiant didn't contribute to the attribution, but I think they're comfortable coming out and saying what they're saying because it's hand in hand with one of these multi seal government reports and they're doing the attribution, which is usually how most of us kind of derive our comfort. And I'll say, and I said this a few episodes ago, but this is yet another example of when an advisory comes out with that cyber national mission force logo on it. When you see CNMF at the very top of then it's a good one. Then you know this shit's gonna be worth it. And I'm super proud of seeing the work that they're doing and putting that out there. But to your question, I think the attribution is coming because you've got CNMF saying this is who these guys are, and then everyone else can pile on whatever it is they've seen, the indicators they saw along the way, any edge cases, but like it's built on top of that.
I asked the question because we've had in the past where Mandiant was correcting some government attribution. Am I wrong, Costin?
Going back to your question, if you ask me how good Mandiant are at attribution, I would say they're the best in the world. There's no argument there. In my opinion, in order to be able to do attribution, you need probably two things. You need the capability and you need the motivation. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there who may have the capabilities, but they don't have the motivation. They just don't do attribution like it's company policy. However, if you have both the capability and the motivation to do that, I think, at least from this point of view, Mandiant is the best in the world.
Why do we care that this APT45 is being broken out? Do we care that it's the fifth bureau of the Inter-Korean Affairs versus the third bureau of foreign intelligence? And the new thing here in this Mandiant announcement was that these guys are now shifting beyond like robbing crypto banks and going after cryptocurrencies and doing ransomware attacks, sometimes against even hospitals and health institutions, right? Like it's taking a more ominous turn. We've in the past kind of just bundled all of this on the
Umbrella.
Lazarus, like on the outside looking in. On the inside looking out, why? Tell me why this is important. Why all of this categorizing and placing in internally is important.
I I think it's massively important. I mean, look, I think the graduation itself is not necessarily all that important. If anything, to me, it's more about Mandiant starting to mature their thinking beyond some really limited early day diamond model obsessive bullshit that was coming out of like all the Department of Defense people that were in Mandiant early on, who just couldn't get out of their own way and ended up with some pretty kind of hilarious and ridiculous situations like Turla's been around for 25 years. They have no APT number because it never managed to meet the bar, the standard of some, pedantic asshole somewhere. So I'm glad that Mandiant is now like graduating more groups, making more sense out of them. Sounds great. I personally hate the numbered groups. I find it impossible to remember, but fine. What I think is significant here is I'm actually really glad to see an attribution claim like this so granular come in hand from multiple organizations, because that's the reminder that when we see another APT coming around with their ops, that we are dealing with a meaningful, very human, very important capability that somebody is investing into in order to get results. And the results in this case appear to be funding nuclear and missile and defense development for one of the most terrifyingly unhinged countries in the world. So we should absolutely care about this, right? Like we have in other situations, in other discussions, we've quite flippantly gone, oh yeah, the North Koreans stealing all this stuff, taking all this money, haha, move on. And the truth is that it's a vital capability for fueling things that we should rightly be horrified by. So I am happy to see that level of granularity in this case.
Costin, why do you think, why is this important? Why do we care it's which unit? And especially for defenders. If I'm a CISO or I'm a network defender and I'm trying to parse my level of risk and exposure to these North Koreans, like, do I care about this, or do I just focus on the technical indicators and try to just go do my routine?
Again, the personal opinion is that the very fine granularity up to the whatever unit or military division is not that important to me. Yeah, perhaps it's good to know in the sense that this unit is this particular thing and that unit is the other thing. So yeah, okay, in the big scope of things, you understand the difference between these two and perhaps, yeah, how they cooperate, but strictly speaking, from a detection point of view, that's not that important. What is more important for me is indicators of compromise, YARA rules, TTPs, description of what their interests are, what they're going for, the tools that they're using. These are like way more interesting for me. And
we got it
we got it from CISA, correct. CISA published a report as well, I think, together with the FBI, right?
Yeah. Let's say CNMF did the cool stuff and then a bunch of other people put their logos on it. Let's be clear.
It's super nice, super welcome. My only complaint is, as usual, the YARA rules are essentially CISA quality. So if you want to deploy them in production, don't. Just test them, patch them, fix them.
Do not put them in the kernel under any circumstances.
God forbid, do not put them in the kernel. Exactly.
But this juxtaposes, this comes perfectly in line with a report out of Dragos on this Frosty Group ICS malware causing disruption services in buildings in Ukraine. And again, no IOCs, no sort of technical details. Like,
you said Dragos, bro.
What's the use of that? Is that just a marketing thing? Well, like, what's the value of telling us that there's this piece of ICS malware here, but okay,
so
we got it.
The thing I was quite surprised when I saw the report, and then I saw all the journalists jumping on this topic and publishing articles. I was wondering, as a journalist, why do you do that without first asking to see the IOCs, the samples? As a journalist, I wouldn't publish a story without seeing the evidence, like the proof.
So you're calling out Andy Greenberg.
He's an amazing,
Andy Greenberg wrote a big
journalist. Yeah, I have tons of respect. But I think that even like the mightiest of the greatest, they still sometimes they
They
fall
make
for
mistakes.
tricks. I don't know. If you're a journalist, you want to do something good for the community. The next time, don't write articles about papers without IOX. Like that's just not okay.
Good rule. That should be like a rule of thumb, right?
That's my advice.
I don't think that's a realistic ask. What I would actually say is
Listen, no IOX, no coverage. No IOX, no coverage.
they should write the story. They should write a negative story about how
How they try
there
to
is.
publish a story without IOX.
Well, no, they should write a story about how somebody is trying to make hay out of a really unfortunate situation that's actually affecting the lives of all kinds of people out in a war zone, and they're trying to make it a sales hook and not providing the kind of thing to substantiate their claim. That's how you stop this shit from happening. If the next time Dragos tries to do this kind of thing, they actually get a really bad round of press coverage, basically calling them opportunistic and trying to war profiteer, then they're not going to do this kind of shit again. They're going to try to do it differently.
They're not alone, though. I mean, this is standard operating procedure. It's why I call APT reports marketing
This
reports.
is
Like, not only are there the IOX, even the IOX, the release of the IOX, they're all old, musty, old things.
look. There's reports and there's reports, and I'm perfectly happy for folks to get a return on their investment when they find cool stuff. I just think that there's a way to be a person and do things, and then there's another where you do this like small time, small minded. I'm trying not to use the term small dick energy, sort of mentality towards APTs and reporting, where you tell people, oh, yeah, we know a thing, it could be affecting you. Now, please fill out this form, and one of our salespeople will get in touch with you, and maybe you can know how you may be affected. That is bullshit. That's the kind of stuff that, no one should be okay with.
Do you guys know this company KnowBe4?
I do not. I haven't heard of them before.
I've seen them, yeah.
There's a company, they do security awareness training, this mandatory thing where people have to look at these videos and pinpoint phishing emails and so on. I bring this up because they're a massive company. They're a big company here in the US. They used to be a public company that went private. I think Thoma Bravo bought them for billions of dollars. They're deployed everywhere throughout the US. These guys had a principal software engineer they hired. Turns out to be an AI-generated person that passed through all their background checks, and within 20 minutes, within like the first 25 minutes on the job, when he got his new MacBook, he started planting malware on the machine. Turned out it was one of these North Korean fake IT workers that apparently KnowBe4 is just one of hundreds of companies that have been infiltrated with this. And part of their announcement was that there's some farm, there's like some fake IT farm that you ship machines to, and this is like an organized thing where North Koreans are working with Chinese VPNs. And my head explodes that this stuff, a principal software engineer passes through these kinds of background checks and hiring procedures. And then someone says, dude, this shit is happening everywhere. It's rampant. This guy shows up for the interview. This guy applies, this guy shows up for the interview, and a third guy shows up on the job when you hire him. And this is kind of rampant in this work from home environment. And if this is part of the North Korean play, like, whew, I mean, how do you protect against this?
Well, I will say this. I think this is happening a lot. This is a byproduct of not so much work from home as much as the gig economy, which is, you think you can just Fiverr your way through things. And that's really okay when you just want somebody to like edit some pictures or do some videos or do some gig work. But the idea that this is a principal software engineer is, I'm sorry, what? Like that's maybe that doesn't mean what it used to mean. But the idea that you would give somebody that level of what is presumably autonomy and access to your systems, and you've never seen them before, is a little scary. Right, like that. I think that in a way they are abusing what seems like a pretty kind of sick system, and I do like to separate that away from the work from home problem, because I see all these like boomer execs who are just like, oh, this didn't used to happen when we were all in the office together. You're like, yeah, that's not the problem here, brother. Like you are
It didn't used to happen though. Like no North Korean guy, no North
Dude,
Korean fake generated AI thing is gonna
that
show up at the
particular
office.
thing
Come on.
didn't used to happen, but there's a reason why people wouldn't shut the fuck up about insider threats, which is to say, oh, what happens if I can't trust the guy sitting in the cubicle next to me, right? Like that, it's a similar problem, but
Yeah, but look how badly the North Koreans have infected US companies and have
But
insiders everywhere.
dude, the problem it look, there are two problems here. There's the North Koreans taking advantage of the gig economy. And then there's the fact that a lot of companies seem very comfortable hiring gig workers and giving them access to critical functions within their stack. You like I understand hiring a gig worker to like work on a website or edit a video, and that's a person you put on like a contractor system, and they don't even get access to the inside VPN and all the whatever. You're like, if you're giving out really crucial parts of your development to gig workers, there is a sick system that you have rolled into, and you're not far away from what we've been faulting, what conspiracy Ryan was trying to say about CrowdStrike. At that point, yeah, why not?
There's my point, right? At some point, an insider will be sitting somewhere in there. And I bring this up because KnowBe4 and Costin has never heard of them. KnowBe4 is a big, massive company that, multi-billions of
Kevin
dollars
Mitnick's
in
company,
market cap.
RIP.
Correct. Rest in peace, Kevin. Anyway, the last question this week, obviously, is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. We started off the podcast touching on this, was this NSO lawsuit, the WhatsApp NSO lawsuit. We had news this week that Google and a bunch of other big companies, Microsoft, LinkedIn, GitHub, a lot of big cloud technology companies filed this amicus brief in this NSO versus Data lawsuit. First of all, for the people who don't understand Latin, what is this amicus brief? This is just them supporting a lawsuit, correct?
I think the Latin term is amicus curiae, which means the friends of the court.
Right. What's the significance of all of these guys weighing in here? I mean, this case is wending its way through court. Juan talked about some of the political implications and previously, but why do we care that all these big companies are joining this?
Well, just like very briefly to mention about the brief itself, which was filed by the Ninth First Amendment Institute on behalf of the El Faro journalists from El Salvador. When these guys, essentially their phones were infected with the Pegasus spyware, El Faro is a big publication, and essentially there's a few key points here, which there's a violation of U.S. laws because of spyware attacks, infections. There's the impact on the press freedom. There's a call for accountability, and obviously the global implications of this thing. And again, props to Microsoft, LinkedIn, GitHub, Trend, big cloud technologies for essentially supporting this brief, saying that essentially from their side, they give essentially support to the brief and legitimize the whole story.
There's a little bit of a legal geo thing as well at play here, right? Because there was a case, this case was originally dismissed because they said the victims and the attackers were in two separate companies. Why are we involving the US court system in this? And I think these technology companies are saying, hey, listen, if you're going to use our platform and use our technologies to participate in these attacks, then we have standing. And I think the amicus brief is part of that. In tandem with that, there's a new report out of Amnesty International and Forbidden Stories claiming that the Israeli government is now meddling on the side of NSO in this lawsuit, the WhatsApp lawsuit. There's reports that the Israeli government raided the NSO offices and seized documents. Specifically, the purpose is to prevent Pegasus files from being included in the lawsuit discovery process. That puts another big spin on it, which is the Israeli government has no interest in NSO, one of their jewel of their technology companies, and I mean major capabilities as well, getting this kind of US treatment, correct?
Yes, but I wonder in what capacity this is happening. So this, if you remember when Hacking Team went down, there were reports that like the first people to show up were like Italian intelligence and Italian MOD people trying to like grab certain systems and get things out of there. Like there's a couple of different ways to look at the Israeli gov involvement in this. One of them is as like NSO is like a jewel for the country, and they were apparently using it as an arm of soft power that was being offered to people that had good relationships with Israel and so on. There's that part where it's a political issue. The other side of it is, to what extent was the Israeli intelligence community a customer of NSO, and knowing their standards and
That's what I mentioned about
practices. I
capabilities.
mean,
Yeah.
they are extremely paranoid about their operational security. They're not going to put themselves in a situation to have their ops scrutinized by somebody, by some third party, by a court, by whomever. So I'm not sure which instinct is what's playing into this one. I can understand both. I'm not justifying either, but it's almost an inevitable situation when you look at both of those. And I think the thing to consider here is that, in a way, like, I know I tend to give big tech a hard time all the time, right? Like, I'm constantly bashing these companies, but I do think that there is some genuine good faith, goodwill, um, effort being put in here to use your legal resources, use your standing as these like mega corporations who can actually take this lawsuit on and use it as a cautionary tale to say, hey, yeah, if you want to abuse our platform, we are going to put real resources into bringing you into discovery and making your life a living hell. So, maybe reconsider how you want to do your access.
I go back to my question from a couple of episodes before. Where are the success stories? And don't tell me, yeah, that those are not success stories. no
The
matter
Israeli gov took them.
no matter what Dave Vitale says. But yeah, it would be a lot more helpful if people would understand and would be shown that actually there are some legitimate use for these technologies. There is still a terrible lack of success stories.
Where does this go? You think this puts NSO out of business eventually, or you think this
I
gets
think
politically settled?
the things are getting tougher and tougher every day for NSO. That's how it feels. Every day there's like I don't know, more threats of sanctions, visa being refused for NSO employees, lawsuits. So it just feels that every day it's becoming like more difficult for NSO to operate. So usually when that happens, there's either some kind of a sale, rebranding, the company being sold to another big company. They're just gonna rebrand.
Right, but you're
Yeah.
suggesting that's usually in a
Mhm.
normal circumstances. This is not normal. I'm saying this gets settled with a prime minister calling a president and saying, does it get settled at that level, at a very, very high political level, because of what
Um,
Juan mentioned, all these capabilities, this sense that this is one of our more important products? There are success stories. They might not be telling Costin. There obviously are success stories. So
I don't know. Again, I don't know for sure, and I don't believe that NSO is actually such an integral part of Israel's defense industries. I think they may not be that important, and if you ask me, it's more likely that they will be rebranded, purchased. Maybe it's like too late to save them. I don't know.
I think they've already done a lot of that legwork. I'm sure they're already operating, like, their primary operations are somewhere else under a different name. The people that matter are already working on something different, because there's no way that you can be successful in this industry while being that notorious and having lawsuits and having all. So, like, you really do want to vacate this shell of a company that's being kind of heavily scrutinized, especially with what we're discussing, right? There's like court discovery. The fact that, like, the fact that the Israeli gov would have to go in and grab their stuff is in itself an admission of massive failure by the part of what that company represents. At the same time, I think we should think about this just a little differently, which is, Apple has done such a good job on the infection vector side of this, or at least, in kind of forcing things into a much smaller funnel of some sort, that a third party company is considered so essential in providing capabilities for mobile spyware, be it NSO or someone else, because there's a bunch of other companies that are doing the same thing, that that we don't see folks just being like, oh, screw it, we'll just do it with our own tools. Like, this isn't worth the hassle, which is what we saw with companies like Hacking Team and Finfisher, right? Like, you saw folks going, it's been long enough, we can probably spin up our own stuff. It's not necessary to deal with this kind of centralized nonsense. You're not seeing it in the mobile space. And I think that's really interesting. It's to say that there is a need there that still needs to be fulfilled by a third party, be it NSO, which it cannot be any longer, or it could just be a random company.
Marked
Well,
out. Yeah,
dude,
we
I mean,
already
but Mark
discussed it.
Dowd works for he does his thing for Five Eyes. You just exclude Five Eyes out of the question, and then say most of these countries feel that it is a necessity that they can only fulfill their mobile surveillance requirements through third-party companies that are not even local, which in itself is usually a fairly uncomfortable situation, that alone. But now what we're also saying is because the US government, US courts, big tech companies, etc., are going after the companies they can reach within ecosystems they can reach, then we're kind of suggesting that the way to fulfill these requirements is to go to these companies in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Singapore, places where they are beyond the reach of any kind of standard or law. And I'm not saying that I'm not putting that blame on anyone in particular. I'm saying it's a circumstance that we should be particularly concerned with.
Costin, last words.
As Juan was saying, I think NSO is just one of many companies out there. There's probably dozens. The capability in general, it comprises two things: the malware itself that used for spying and the exploits. If you ask me what is more important here, I think it's the exploits. Those are like generally the difficult thing to develop, while the malware, essentially anyone can do the development. Anyone can deploy the malware, even like use some open source tools for that purpose. So I would put like maybe more emphasis on the control, experts control of exploits, 0 days, and mitigations in 0 days. Maybe pay more attention to the companies who are involved in the trading of 0 days, like exploit markets. I think recently Zerodium announced that they are going out of business because there's like a huge drop in demand, which is also, I think, an interesting topic to discuss, perhaps in one of the next episodes. But like just to wrap up everything, I think this is important, but we should also keep in mind that NSO is just one of many.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk again next week.
Well, thanks everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you.